As the world's brokenness grows and culture strays further and further from a Christian worldview, how are Christians called to navigate this brokenness? And how do we respond to it? How do we need to think and act differently? Join us today as we discuss these questions with Catholic author Emily Chapman, who writes about this in her newest book, Letters to Myself from the End of the World. I'm Father Pivonka, and I'm president of Franciscan University in Steubenville, Ohio, and you're watching Franciscan University Presents. Stay with us. Welcome to Franciscan University Presents. I'm your host, Father Pivonka. I'm president of Franciscan University in Steubenville, and we're talking today about navigating the world's brokenness. I'm joined with our panelists, Dr. Regis Martin, professor of systematic theology here at Franciscan University, and Dr. Scott Hahn, the Father Michael Scanlon professor of biblical theology and the new evangelization here at Franciscan. And we are pleased to welcome our special guest, Emily Stimpson Chapman. Emily is an award-winning Catholic author whose books include Hope to Die, The Christian Meaning of Resurrection and the Body, co-authored by Dr. Hahn, and These Beautiful Bones and Everyday Theology of the Body, and The Catholic Table, Finding Joy Where Food and Faith Meet. Emily lives in Pittsburgh with her husband and 3 children, where she wrote Letters to Myself from the End of the World, which we are discussing today. Welcome. It's great to have you with us.
It is so good to be here.
So this was a wonderful book, of which you and I have been able to have the pleasure of talking about a lot. But just share with us how you got the idea and where did this come from? Just the idea, I think, was so creative.
Well, I was under contract. I had been under contract for several years with Scott.
At Emmaus Road.
Yes, Emmaus Road, to write a book about our house renovation. But you know, we've been adopting babies at a rather rapid clip. Every time I come on here, there's a new baby. So that kept getting pushed back. And then when I finally sat down last spring, in the spring of 2020, to write the book, and I cleared my calendar and I was going to do it.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, the world was going crazy. And it just didn't feel like the right time to write a book about my house renovation. Yeah. And there was so much I wanted to say to people, because I saw people questioning the church, questioning what it meant, questioning the country, questioning what justice was, questioning what mercy was, dealing with so much rage and anger. And the answers that a lot of them were coming up with were not healing answers. They were not life-giving answers. And I felt like I had answers to give, but I didn't want to type them out in 2,200 characters on Instagram. So I just started writing letters to myself, like Emily at 25, when I was asking a lot of those questions, or when I was going through a lot of the struggles that I saw people going through. And it was easy to talk to myself because it's easy to be compassionate to your past self.
To your past self.
But you can also be very bluntly honest. And so it was a great way, it was a writing device that I could use to both be very blunt and very honest, but at the same time have great mercy, because I know myself and what had led to me having those struggles. And I just kept writing. I think I ended up writing 45 letters.
Yeah, I think a common theme of this is really, what is it, I mean, this is basic, but what does it mean to be holy? What does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus? And you're really giving yourself, it sounds weird to say yourself, advice of 20 years of living that, but that's really so much of this, isn't it?
Well, it is, and I think one of our greatest struggles as a church today is a lack of spiritual maturity. And spiritual maturity isn't holiness, but it's a step on the way to holiness. And so we're not able to think through the problems of the world. We're not able to think through the problems of our heart like adults in a mature way, like in a way that's been soaked with sacraments in Scripture. And so one of the best ways, I think, to show people, not like I'm the world's most mature Christian either, but I'm better than I was 20 years ago. And
if we could all say that, that would be great, right?
Some days it's questionable, but most days I'm better than I was 20 years ago. And so just being able to show like how I process these things and how I think through these things and how I in some ways parent myself, how I'm a mother to myself when I need to be a mom to myself.
Well, I knew you when you were 20 years younger.
You did.
You don't look a day older than you did then, but I suspect you're a whole lot wiser, and you have suffered greatly in the interim. I'm struck by the title, At the End of the World. I mean, that's that's sort of provocative, apocalyptic on purpose. Do you mean that as a metaphor? COVID brought the end of the world? The lockdown was like that?
It depends on the day how I mean it. Some days it's much more metaphorical, because I do think there's been a shift in how people think about each other, how people treat each other, how we approach suffering and happiness and questions of faith that is radically different from where, the Emily in 2000 that I'm writing to.
Yep.
So the end of the world that most of us have known, and I think, that is, but some days I'm also like, I don't know, it's
Could
Jesus.
be it. That's right.
Where is he? It's coming, because it is. There are very difficult, dark things happening in the world right now, and the world's brokenness is manifesting itself in such a powerful way. And so for a lot of people, even if it's not the end of the world, it feels like the end of the world.
Right.
It's funny, I was here 31 years ago. We moved in the summer of 1990, and we had heard so much. We had visited, but never really, experienced Steubenville. So no sooner had we begun to unpack, I slipped away on Saturday night to go up to the campus here and to see a high school summer conference. And I had no preparation. This tent is packed with well over 1,000 high school kids, and I had heard of the man, but I'd never seen Father Benedict Rochelle before. And as he's talking, he is just connecting with the kids with humor, with scripture, and then suddenly he goes on a very gentle rant where he's saying, in 50 years, most all of you will be here, but I most certainly won't be. And he said, I want to tell you that in 50 years, all of the institutions that we take for granted, the government, federal, state, local, and he just starts ticking on, none of this will be here. Only the Catholic Church. And I was standing next to the auxiliary bishop of New York City, Bishop Hahn. I look at him, sounds rather dour, doesn't it? He said, apocalyptic, And I remember thinking, it just seemed like a disconnect, except that it didn't. It felt like it was something that he felt like he had to say. Mm-hmm. And now 31 years later, 32, whatever, it's like, that's probably accurate. I remember talking to Father Michael Scanlon about that a few days later, and he's like, you mark my word, he's not wrong. And it's the end of the world as we know it. It doesn't have to be the end of history altogether, but this world is being shaken, and our lives are too. And you point to how hard it is to pursue holiness in the midst of injustice, how to grow in the church when there is so much division, as well as the nation. All of these things that 20 years ago we could just take for granted. It's like the kingdom that cannot be shaken, which is why God shakes up everything else.
Yeah, and it's beautiful just to watch, literally to watch you over 20 years to grow and to develop in such a changing world. What does Christian maturity look like then? If that's, you're speaking to your young self and you're growing up and you're becoming more spiritually mature, what does that look like? What are elements of spiritual maturity?
I think a lot of it is letting reason guide your emotions. Mm-hmm. So, our emotions always want to get out ahead. Right. And, you're feeling angry at injustice, or you're feeling despairing over something that hasn't, some tragedy in your life, or you're grieving, you're anxious. And to go back to what you know. You know that God is faithful. You know that his will is perfect. You know that he is in control. You know that he has laid out certain behaviors that are life-giving for you. Like, it's not God's like, hey, don't do this because it's fun for me. He wants us to have life, and that's how we have life.
It would seem to me that the working temptation you have in writing a book like this is condescension. You're going to patronize this kid who's 20 years younger and really sort of stupid, and you're going to shake her up. I'm going to be very didactic. I'm going to dump on you and take notes. But it's not at all like that. It's refreshingly free of that kind of cant and pomposity. So you pulled it off.
I think spiritual maturity also has some humility in it.
And a sense of humor, a kind of distance from yourself. You see yourself, and it's pretty laughable. And you enjoy the cosmic joke at your own expense. But from a divine perspective, you can shed some light on this predicament that you were in 20 years before.
It's so readable, and it's so relatable, unlike almost every other example of self-help I've looked at. This is older self-help,
It's honest.
You really know yourself well enough. I remember you 20 years ago, too, in the grad classes as well as assisting us in the office and all of that. And I didn't think of you as being as immature as you think you see yourself now. But I can't help but wonder if everybody is going to be able to identify, because these aren't things that are peculiar to one temperament, yours, This is stuff that everybody struggles with.
It is, and I think, that's the funny thing is all of you have known me for almost as long. I was just a little bit older then, because I hadn't yet come to Steubenville. That's funny. Yes. That's also funny, yeah. So you guys all kind of remember Emily from 20 years ago.
Can we tell our stories now? We're going to write another book, Letters to Emily.
No, I think one of the things that life has taught me, which I'm sure you guys have all learned as well, is how much we have in common. Like, the struggles may manifest themselves differently in how we communicate them or how we talk about them or what instances cause them. But the struggle to be just, the struggle to be merciful, the struggle to bear wrongs patiently, the struggle to hope and trust and wait with joy. Like, everybody goes through those. We are so alike. Our human nature, it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter what culture you're raised in, you're still a human being.
I really have to dissent from that to this extent, because one of the vices that you distance yourself from in the introduction, you identify anger as something you've struggled with. And I must confess, 20 years ago, I wasn't aware of that. You must have been really angry with me.
I was.
Oh, okay. But you were wonderfully reticent and withdrawn. You were just taking notes, and you had that lovely, winsome smile. But the one vice you dissociate yourself from struck me as odd: sloth. Because that is the characteristic sin of the modern age, and you have been blessedly spared. St. Thomas defines sloth as a kind of sadness in the face of an obvious spiritual good. He's offered us salvation, and it's as if we said, is there anything better on offer? Why that? It leaves us sort of cold, indifferent, but you're not tempted by that, and that's quite extraordinary.
I think where God gives us all different natural virtues and strengths, and
you have a natural hope.
I guess I have a natural hope. I also have a choleric's conviction that anything can be dealt with enough prayer and nagging and work and
But the question is, you said all those things beautifully, and you said you have this hope and all that. Does this come back because you've looked back and you've seen, oh my gosh, God has been faithful? So, or were you experiencing it in the midst of the storm, in the midst of the difficulty?
I think it's both.
Okay.
Because I have, the way my story has unfolded, God has done some really beautiful things with waiting a long time to be married, and then, struggling with infertility, and then this explosion of, children all of a sudden. And so it is, on one hand, easy to look back and say, look at how God was not just, God was using all of that to bring us to where we are today. And God is, I would say he's the world's best chess player. Right. He's able to see every move and outplay you, and he's so good at that. But even in the midst of that, I think one of the great blessings of my life was, in a sense, when I left the church and became very good friends with Protestants who had a deep, active, living relationship with Jesus. And so at 19, I really started learning what it meant to have a relationship with Christ. And so that relationship then could sustain me. I knew him. And because I knew him, even when things were very dark, I held on to that hope and that trust that he was somehow going to make everything right. And so that's a gift. That's not something I've done. That's not something, I don't know, that's just a gift of faith. That's a gift of grace.
Right. And you came to that over time. And that's one of the things that I appreciated is the relationship with Christ, and then things began to come into place and build together, coming back to the church and understanding the beauty of the sacraments. And all of these was a part of your maturing process.
It was, and it's just like when I watch my children grow right now. They master new things at different times, and then there's like this leap forward, and then they kind of coast along, and then there's a leap. And so I would say around the time I'm writing this book to, that was a big leap time. So there was a big leap at 19 when I really met Christ. There was a big leap at 25 to 27 when I came back to the church and came to Steubenville. There's been a big leap the past few years as a mother. So it's just how children grow. They call them the wonder, sort of wonder weeks, where they have these big, huge brain leaps and a lot's going on and it's really hard. And then you come out on the other side. And I think we all do that, with our growth with the Lord too. We have these struggles and these intense crucibles, and then we come out a little more mature.
People who write, they have this thing called a suspension of disbelief. And I'm wondering if when you were that age, and if you had stumbled upon a collection of letters meant for you, would you have resented that? Somebody telling you, this is what's going to happen. Laying out in prophetic fashion every unfolding detail of your life. I mean, wouldn't you have perhaps said, hey, let me find out on my own. Let me be surprised.
If you think too much about the premise of the book, it will get all bendy, kind of like there's multiple dimensions and stuff. Because I'm not really writing to myself. I'm writing about myself. And I'm letting people see, I'm writing to the women on Instagram. I'm writing to my babysitters who come to my house and who I see them struggling. I'm writing to the people on the evening news who I see breaking. I'm writing to strangers I've seen on Facebook who've walked away from the church. Because when I look at them, I see myself. I see all of us. I see the image of God.
But you were not like that 20 years ago, were you? Is this an acquired taste? I mean, you have a confessional style that I wasn't aware of 20 years ago. But then I knew you more than 20 years ago, and I never thought the next president of Franciscan. I thought, here's another meathead,
Can we just stop on that point? Another meathead, we'll sit with that and we'll come back. Thanks for staying with us.
When I was getting ready for confirmation, we were told to choose a patron saint. And so I read the life of St. Augustine, and I saw that this bishop and this man who probably has written the greatest writings on forgiveness and on grace, I saw that when he was a kid, he was a juvenile delinquent. And when I saw St. Augustine was a juvenile delinquent and was one of the greatest doctors of the church, I thought, there's hope for me.
So we won't get totally into where we ended the last segment, but just this sense of a confessional and just kind of bearing your soul and Regis was just sharing about some of the things he wasn't aware of, and how did you wrestle with that, and how did you share that? And
25 or 20 years ago, I would not have written that way. I would have approached things very academically, which if you look at a lot of my writing, even from the early 2000s, it's going to be much more didactic. I want to talk about the theology. I'm going to talk about the saints. I'm going to talk about church teaching. But over the years, I've learned that people remember the stories that incarnate the teaching more than they remember that's how they remember the teachings. And so if I want people to know Jesus, and if I want them to know how he's going to be faithful to them and understand the teachings, then I have to be willing to be vulnerable myself and share how he's worked in my life. And I can't just be the teacher from on high imparting. It's not like I'm St. Augustine. But St. Augustine does his confessions, and he really shares how God has worked in his life. And I think that level, there's always going to be things I don't share. There's things that I hold back. But I think you do have to be vulnerable.
Yeah, I think of Lord Byron's observation. He said, I read the Confessions because it taught me many new sins. He would never have said that after coming back from the library reading the Summa. Right. Okay. Yeah, there's an impersonality to Aquinas and a passion in Augustine, which I think you have imitated.
And that's one thing I appreciated, was that you can see in the letters that you're writing, wrestling with issues that are they're not abstract, but like the whole part that you do on justice. This, again, remember the summer of 2020 and everything that was going on, and you're wrestling with that and talking about that and sharing with that experience. What was that like?
It was so hard because this is one of the things I've been thinking about with our world. We underestimate how broken the world is. Our world is so broken that even the very, the very best and the most beautiful things come with loss. Conversion, marriage, family, children, adoption. There's nothing good in this world that doesn't also in some way bring with it a sense I've lost friends, I've lost this life, I've lost this identity, I've lost sometimes my employment. We lose so much even when we receive something good and holy. And then And then there is stuff that is not good and holy. And there is, we break everything as men and women. And so it's hard not to be angry, and it's hard not just sometimes want to burn everything down, at least if you're an Irish redhead, choleric. And that's what we see. That's what you see when you turn on the news. That's what you've seen over the past year. People want to burn everything down. Left, right, black, white, Catholic, non-Catholic. Like, people want the world to burn because of its injustice. And Jesus didn't burn the world, he died for the world. And so we have to figure out how we're called to respond to this brokenness.
Well, that's really a saving grace, I think, of the narrative. You acknowledge the world is a mess, it's broken, but you don't appoint yourself as the one to fix it. I mean, you have that humility, which I think is supposed to be peculiar to the Christian life. I mean, if you read Hamlet, he confesses that everything is out of joint, and somehow the gods have appointed me to set things right. And he makes a huge mess of it by the end of the play. You are spared that kind of pride, that kind of hubris, but you acknowledge, I mean, you have the presence of mind to see this is a catastrophe that we're living through. Something's got to be done. We need God. We have forgotten God.
No, that's, I worked in politics before I came here. I left a career in DC to come to Steubenville. And one of the reasons for that is that I just saw people spinning their wheels and having the same argument over and over again. And people, we're not God. We can't see what's going to actually fix things. And we can't, all the pieces. And people are like, let's solve poverty. And they're like, let's try this program. It's like they're throwing darts at a wall blind. And it doesn't mean you don't try to mitigate those problems, but those problems aren't solved unless the heart is healed. And so it's people encountering Christ, people receiving his grace in the sacraments, people learning to die to themselves and love others sacrificially and to extend mercy. Like it's those type of people who can make policies that will actually make the world better. And so unless you fix the heart, the rest of the stuff is just...
One of my favorite parts is the letter where you say, assume brokenness. Because we're all broken. It's just that we want to cover it up. And I think back to you 20 years ago, and you were so omnicompetent as a grad student, as an administrative assistant, but you were also straitjacketed by graduate assignments as well as administrative duties. And now I see that accepting our brokenness enables us to enter into a real deep connection with other people who are broken. And so when you say people want to burn things down, you're right. People want to break things. But that's precisely because they can't accept or acknowledge their own brokenness.
And you, one of the letters that was just on that as well, that you write is that the church is going to let you down. I mean, the institutions, the people are going to let you down, and politics is going to let you down. And just speak to the heartbrokenness in that, and how do you wrestle with that, and how do you still believe in the church that has made mistakes, and individuals in the church, priests that have made mistakes, and you're wrestling with that and coming out. One of the things I love is you come out on the other side in this. It's not the end of the story.
No, it's not all deconstruction.
Yeah.
But I have come to just expect disappointment, because I know that everyone is broken, and the church is made up of broken men and women. And I put a nice line in there about friars I trust.
We appreciate
for
that.
You. Yeah, I threw that in for you. But it is, when you see that everyone is broken, you stop putting people on pedestals. I don't look for a bishop or a pope or a president or a priest to
or
be
Supreme Court Justice.
or a Supreme Court Justice to be my savior, or professor.
Present company included.
Right.
I worked in his house with him for too long. Scott in the morning with, that's always but no, you just have to expect the brokenness in humanity, and that makes it easier to respond to with compassion to people. So.
There is a sense, however, if you're plugged in with God and you're wedded to his church, his bride, you know that the culture war has already been won. The war's over. It's just a series of mopping up exercises. We've got to persuade the enemy to lay down his arms. But we've won. The cross has achieved that definitive victory. That gives you, I think, a certain buoyancy, a certain optimism over the short haul.
I don't know. I mean, it has been won. Obviously, Jesus has won the ultimate battle. But man, it's like World War I out there, though, right now. He's won the ultimate battle, but the bloodshed and the heartache and the I think it almost can feel minimizing when we say, well, he's won, the victory is secure, and it's true.
No, it doesn't breed, it can't
Yeah.
induce a kind of smugness, a complacence.
Right, 'cause it's
but I
so
don't
many
intend that, rather hope, the sense that my life has been rescued by Jesus. So whatever comes, we can handle it together.
I know that no matter what, Jesus is going to somehow, all of this will be worth it. Like I have the absolute
you in
confidence
your own
in
life.
that. For everybody. Like Jesus is...
If an individual chooses
as long as they
it.
choose him.
See, that's
if
just
they
it.
choose him.
That's a
So
big
at the
if.
end, like I know God is working in every circumstance to give every single person the absolute maximum opportunity to choose him. And those who do choose him at the end will somehow look back and say,
He was there.
that was beautiful.
Yeah,
Like you totally knew it. Like I can look back on the past 20 years and say, oh, God totally knew what he was doing through the single years and the infertility. I believe that all of us who stand with Christ at the end of days will look back and say, okay, you were right and I was wrong. Good job. I'm glad. I think he answers our prayers. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But
When you said that, you induced dissent. For me, because I agree at the surface level that the battle's won, and Kuhlman's distinction between, D-Day and VE Day, he's invaded, it's a mop-up operation, but it's a theological cliche that I think would be best respectfully retired, because it isn't a mop-up operation, because what we're mopping up is a mess that is continually being made more and more. And I think what we have to do is go back and recognize that what Jesus accomplished in his suffering and death was not to do away with suffering and death.
Right.
It was to commandeer it. He commandeered suffering and death, so that when we ask the question, why would God allow this or that? The hardest question is, why would God allow Good Friday? The single greatest sin ever committed against the Almighty, and yet it's the single greatest grace as well. He is redeeming his executioners. Which is beyond counterintuitive. It's beyond mop-up. And so it's not just transforming bread and wine into his body, blood, soul, and divinity. It's transforming our sufferings, our anxieties, our sadness. As long as we turn and face them honestly and humbly, as you do in the book, once you could admit high anxiety, sadness, anger, rage, depression, anorexia, or whatever, then you can lay them on the altar. And then Christ can transform that. And I just feel as though what we can expect is not for things to get better and better every day in every way, but for God to continue to transform the sins of the world into sources and wellsprings of salvation and our own suffering and anxiety. And this, I think, gets us really close to the heart of St. Augustine. This is realism. And this is why we're not afraid to tell our stories, warts and all, and not just the way it was 20 years ago, but we still have these weaknesses and anxieties now. And so we still have a lot to lay upon the altar when it comes to...
No, Scott, you express with much greater eloquence than I could have summoned the point that I was trying to make. When we look upon the pierced and crucified Jesus, whom we put there by our sins, but who arrived on his own because of an incomprehensible depth of love, we are to see that grotesquerie in the perspective of Easter Sunday. Because with the resurrection, despair and despondency were destroyed.
Amen.
Vanquished for all time.
I've been outdone in eloquence there.
But I think it would be important for you that there is a sense of joy in what you're writing as well. So it's not just woe and horrible, but yes, the church is broken, but you also spend some time talking about the beauty that exists in her and the beauty in relationships and some of the people that you've encountered. That's been a part of your story as well. It's not just, it's not let it burn, but it's also, there's something beautiful here.
There is, and there's the Eucharist, and there are the saints. And I think the saints show us the best way to walk through the mess. It's so easy today to be outraged. And it's easy to vent that outrage on social media, in conversations with people. The world is trying to cultivate our outrage. Everything wants us to be outraged.
Every headline.
Outrage doesn't save the world. Like the world doesn't need us to be outraged. It needs us to be holy. It needs us to be loving. It needs us to be merciful. It needs us to know that Jesus is like when we are in our suffering, it's not just Easter Sunday to look forward to, but Jesus is with us right now. We never suffer alone. There's such a deep desperation and loneliness in our culture, and Jesus is with us.
Very quickly, and maybe throw you a curveball, one of the saints that you mentioned, is there one that you just want to mention that's been kind of a source of inspiration for you?
I mean, I talk a lot about Catherine of Siena and Hildegard of Bingen.
Yeah.
And Hildegard is particularly wonderful because she is a choleric, melancholic like me.
But what about that, right? What about her gave you inspiration?
She was such a pill. Man, I struggled to write about her. We talked about this when we did a show on her because she was always led by her. She had a temper. She wanted to control things. She wanted to make things happen, and she did make a lot happen. But it was amazing to watch her over the course of her 80 years. You know, Catherine was 5 years old and doing Hail Marys on the stairs. But Hildegard really was the slow working of grace in her soul that made her holy. And it gives personally a lot of hope to think that maybe by the time I'm 80, someone
But when you
gentle.
consider, say, the backdrop of Catherine's life, the world that she inhabited, it was a bloody mess. It was just a calamity. Half of Italy, half of Europe was wiped out by this plague, and most of her family was wiped out. I mean, her twin sister doesn't survive. And the extraordinary thing is that she does get angry. There is a righteous indignation. She uses the metaphor of the lion bellowing to awaken the dead cubs. I mean, that's pretty powerful stuff. She spoke truth to power. I mean, she wasn't this pious wallflower. Even though she may have been anorexic.
Yeah, and I think you deal with that, the wrestling with that. So we'll be right back with more of Franciscan University Presents. Please stay with us.
One of the greatest gifts I've been given in becoming a spiritual director through Franciscan University School of Spiritual Direction is the ability to be able to witness and walk with someone as they're discovering their own unique and unrepeatable story, the story that God's written for them since the beginning of their creation. By pointing out the grace, where God is, asking them some good questions, you really get to watch and discover someone's story unfolding. And it's just a beautiful thing to be able to witness them see God in their lives and see themselves through God's eyes.
What if you discovered a university with unmatched science, faculty, and programs? A place where you didn't have to choose science over faith. At Franciscan University of Steubenville, you'll find faith-inspired, student-focused, research-driven programs leading to satisfying careers in medicine, scientific research, engineering, computer science, and many more science and health fields. At Franciscan University of Steubenville, education is more than just a word, it's a discovery.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining us. You're watching Franciscan University Presents, and we record here in the ComArt studio at Franciscan University in Steubenville. Our students are operating the cameras and the equipment. Members of our theology faculty, Dr. Martin and Dr. Hahn, and I are discussing navigating the world's brokenness with Emily Stimpson Chapman. Emily, one of the things that you spend quite a bit of time just discussing and kind of wrestling with is spiritual motherhood and being a mother and being a woman. And I must say, I would have loved to read this 20 years ago, you know, with some of the newly married couples that I've worked with over the years and the young women. It was just insightful for me. So maybe share some of your experience with that and how you wrestled with that.
Sure. Well, you know, one of my big questions when I was first coming back into the church, something that I've been struggling with for years, was what did it mean to be a woman? Because the culture throws so many different things at us. You know, a woman is, you know, sexy. A woman is thin. A woman is, you know, not a helpmate, but not a leader. A woman should be all the different adjectives you want to throw at it. And I didn't know what I was supposed to be because I was sexy was not my vibe. I was not really a gentle person in the way that I thought of gentleness, not the way the church talks about gentleness. I was not meek in the sense that I thought about meekness, not the way the church talks about meekness. And I didn't know. I didn't know where I fit in, especially as the years went on and I was still single. And I was like, well, am I a mother? Am I supposed to be at home, but I'm not married? So how do I do this? I can't just go propose to a guy on the street corner and like,
good choice.
Hey, let's get married so I can do what these women are supposed to do. So I had to really dive deep into the church's teachings. And it was through the writings of John Paul II and St. Edith Stein that I found the church's teachings on the feminine genius, which really is spiritual motherhood. And that, John Paul II says, is what it means to be a woman. And just like the physical reveals the spiritual truths, that we live in a world where we learn about the spiritual truths and reality through the physical. A woman's body, which is oriented towards motherhood, points us to understanding that women are oriented towards motherhood. And that doesn't mean necessarily bearing children, but it means being nurturing and nourishing life and seeing the dignity of the person, the particular dignity, and helping the person to both see it in themselves and live it. And that, we have a lack of women doing that in the culture today, and I think that's one of the reasons we're struggling so much as a culture is because women are not being the mothers we're made to be.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful image, and you and I have obviously talked a lot about this already. But just as you said that, I saw a little boy standing in front of his mother, and him being loved and scolded and encouraged, and so much what that is your heart, and it's what your heart's always been, right? Yeah, being a mother.
No, it is, and it's I think one of the great joys I find in motherhood now is that I had decades to think about its deeper meaning and to work on living that in relationship to other people. So I couldn't be a mother to a child, but I could be a mother to my friends. I could be a mother to my neighbors. I could be a mother to my nieces and nephews. I could be a mother to my sisters, just in terms of really seeing them. And that, I think, is when we talk about the brokenness in our culture, people aren't being seen. Like their dignity. We're lumping people into groups and classes, and we label them, we dismiss them, we don't see them. And I think it's a real lack. Women are spending too much time looking at ourselves. We're all spending too much time looking at ourselves and not looking at the person in front of us and loving them as they need to be loved, not as an emotion, but as an action that responds to their deepest needs.
Well, one of C.S. Lewis's insights is that in relation to God, we are all feminine. I mean, the universe of being as having been created stands in relation to Creator, Logos, God. And what we see today, I think, is a terrible flight from femininity, from the feminine. And that, the instinct to be nurturing, giving, is consubstantial with being a woman, biologically a woman. And yet to be in flight from that is really a kind of self-hatred, a self-destructive impulse that if you don't get hold of it, if grace doesn't somehow overcome it for you, you're gonna create a great deal of mischief for yourself and for others. And we see that in all of the wreckage of the culture. Women who don't want to be women.
But I think they don't even understand what it means to be women, because they've been told you can't be. They hear you're called to be a mother and they think, oh, I'm supposed to not use my intelligence. I'm not supposed to use my gifts, but I like math. I don't want to, I'm not interested in literature, or I like fixing cars. Why do I want to keep a house? And that's okay.
Yes.
And what the church says is that everything you do as a woman. Yeah. And so if you love math and you want to be an engineer, awesome. God gave you a mind to be an engineer, but you're an engineer as a woman. You're always doing those things as a woman. And so it's sorting out all the wheat and the chaff, which I try to do a bit in there, between what people hear when you say you're called to be a mother and what the church means when she says you're called to be a mother, because they're very different things.
One of the most perceptive diagnoses in the letters is how the virtual is not real. Because when we hear virtual reality, we don't recognize it for the oxymoron that it is. The virtual is not real. But it goes back to reality TV. It goes back to, it comes forward to Instagram and that kind of thing. Practically all of the models out there for women, but it's just as true for men. Men don't have models. They're virtual models, they're actors or
they're caricatures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
And so with a kind of laser beam precision, you gently put your finger on something, but it really points to the need in the church as well as the world for role modeling. But even that is a cliche, because what it really comes down to is mothering. Not just the biological, but likewise fathering, and not just the physical, but the interpersonal, the experience, and I must admit that when I think about writing letters to myself 20 years ago, it's a terrifying thing because the perfectionism that I had as a father, as a paternal leader, the anxiety. I think now that fatherhood is non-anxious leadership. Leadership can be very anxious, and when it is, it creates all kinds of consternation in the people you're trying to lead. And I would say that over the course of years, only when you submit to the Lordship of Christ, you're still faltering as you're doing it, but you're learning that, okay, cast your anxieties upon Him. And in the process, virtual reality gives way to reality. And that is, I think, mucky enough, but it's not unreal.
I think that for increasing numbers of people, it hasn't happened. They're still seeking refuge in an unreal world, cyberspace. I mean, the lockdown sort of reinforced that. And it's the triumph of postmodernism because the computer, the iPhone, is really the perfect instrument of postmodernism because it levels everything. I mean, what you see on the internet is neither good nor bad, right nor wrong, true nor false, ephemeral nor enduring, important or trivial. It's simply there. Everything has the same weight. And people who live like that are frightening. I mean, you see the fallout from it if you go to a restaurant and here is a couple and they're each looking at their iPhone, or later when they're in bed, they're watching porn separately in the same bed. I mean, this is not real. This is not human. I mean, never mind grace. At the level of nature, this is hideous. This is diseased.
And some of the things you share with that I thought was insightful with that, and that even what you just said, so much of what you said in the world today is shocking to hear, to be an engineer from a woman's perspective, where we want to, or the culture wants to make everything the same and no distinction. But I think you elevate, you make more beautiful and more understanding for me as the reader what it is to be a woman and what it is to be a mother. And there was a dignity to about it that I just think gets lost in our culture today.
When I think about this book, all of my books, they are acts of motherhood for me. Like, I'm trying to be a mother, gently teaching my children truth. Like, if you look at, in scriptures, the mother is often one of the teachers of the truth, of the first teacher in the virtues. So how we model it, and I do this on social media, and I love Instagram. I wouldn't have my babies without social media. I wouldn't be an actual mother without social media. I live in sort of the isolation that a lot of young moms live in right now. I'm at home with my kids. It's not in Steubenville. Steubenville is its own wonderful place. But there's no other women in my neighborhood. They're all in the office. So I'm alone all day without a car with small children. And if I didn't have social media, if I didn't have that connection, I would probably be in a mental institution right now. So, but it's finding out how do we use it in truthful and life-giving ways. And that doesn't mean posting every thought. It doesn't mean getting into every debate. It doesn't mean posting endless pictures of myself. But how do I establish real connections with people and share truth and do it in an authentic way? And so but that too is an act of motherhood. Everything can be an act of motherhood when you approach it with a desire to lead people to a deeper understanding of their dignity and a deeper love for Christ.
And I pay attention to what you post, not everything.
The recipes you cook.
I can cook, but not everything. But when I think about it, the word that came to just as you were sharing is honest. You're honest. You share not just the great days and not just the beauty tips in this, but the
skincare. Are you really watching me for the skincare?
Pretty much. But again, that there's an honesty about that, and that's one of the things that I object to so strongly to Facebook and Instagram and social media is that you create a world that's not real, and if this is what the young moms are looking at, that's what I have to be, then they turn away from that. I always joke, whoever spent 30 minutes with Facebook or Instagram walked about more happy, after experiencing that. I think you do it in this book. You're honest, but there's a sense of hope. There's a sense of, I could do this when you read and when you look at your Instagram as well.
Which I think is it's what a good mother does. It's what a good father does. You help your children see the world as it is. You help them see who they're called to be. You help them know that God is in charge of it all. And you do that with your children. You do that with your friends. You do that with, your readers or however it works out. But it's knowing who you are first. And I think so many people don't know who they are. They don't know what it means to be the image of God. They don't know what it means to be a man. They don't know what it means to be a woman. Until you figure those things out, you can't be that for other people.
Right. And that's what that is I think one of the fundamental crises right now is just, what does it mean to be human? I mean, not just male, what does it mean to be human? Because we want to separate those things. And again, you provide the 20-year-old somebody a sense of inspiration that this is a journey, this is a process, I can actually do this.
Yeah, and it doesn't happen overnight. We all still go to confession. Like all of us here have been walking with Christ for decades, and you're still stumbling, and you're still.
Well, you emphasize that in confession too, and prayer, and that sort of thing. It comes back to the fact that Jesus Christ created us. He gave us freedom, so he allowed us to fall, but he redeems us. And he doesn't just redeem us by saying, okay, from this point on, you better stop sinning. He's there in the confessional. He's there in the Mass. He's there on our brokenness. And I think that, Christ didn't set the world on fire. He died for the world. And yet there is a sense in which he said, I have not come to bring peace but a sword, and how I wish that the world was ablaze, But it's that kind of fire that causes Clopas to say, did not our hearts burn within us? And that's what I think your readers are going to pick up. That right now, you're not rejecting the self of 20 years ago. You're loving yourself with words of affirmation, but also instructive lessons that, can be hard at times. But I think this is going to reach an immense amount of people who are going to be able to accept their brokenness, but in Christ. Yeah.
Of course, the pity is that we live in an age when nobody's reading, a post-literate age.
Except Instagram.
And that's one of the reasons why I'm on Instagram. And why do you think the letters are so short? They're just a little bit longer than Instagram posts. And I get it. Scary. I have 3 children, 3 and under. I can barely write books. I can't hardly read them either.
Spending an hour each day spending reading, and it's not happening.
I don't even know what I did. There was a lot of children, and there was a lot of poop, and there was a lot of cooking. It's and then I'm trying to send off books, and it's people are so overwhelmed, and so I think it's a question of how do we adapt mediums to try to reach people where they are, and then draw them into the book or to the Bible study.
Sounds like another idea for another day. Exactly there. Up next, our panel and our guest will share our final thoughts in navigating the world's brokenness. Please stay with us.
My own experience with growth in the spiritual life is that it's very much tied to death to self. And what I think is interesting about dying to yourself is that it's the paradox of the Christian life, that when you die to yourself, it's not going to kill you. It's actually going to bring more life and more love. So, for example, in my vocation as a married woman and in my family, when I die to my own will, for the good of the ones I love, I actually create more life and love in my family. And so it's true with God too. As I bend to his will, as I surrender to him, I let him have the throne of my heart. More life, more love from God flourishes, and my spiritual life grows.
There is a place where education begins and faith and reason connect. Franciscan University of Steubenville's online programs will advance your career through an e-learning experience that's both academically excellent and passionately Catholic. With online degrees taught by full-time professors in theology, catechetics, business, education, and other disciplines, you can earn your master's degree online without changing your lifestyle. Find out more today at franciscan.edu, where your faith and career can connect online.
Welcome back to Franciscan University Presents. We've come to our final segment. So Regis, your final thoughts.
Yeah, no, I'd be delighted. This is a terrific book. It's the best of the batch, and I'm so grateful that you wrote it. But let me say something. I mean, I don't want this to sound cavilling, but this is sort of confessional in the style in which you wrote the book. So let me tell you, I was annoyed at first reading the endorsements, because what struck me was, with the exception of yourself, they were all women. What's going on here? I mean, were there no men you couldn't find to promote the book? I mean, I would have been delighted to say something pleasant about it. But also, it implied that this is only meant for women. And I don't think you intended that, because otherwise you've cut out half your audience, and there goes part of the royalties. And when I read women authors like Flannery O'Connor or Jane Austen or P.D. James, I don't think of them as women. I think of them as writers who appeal across the board, across the spectrum. You do that. Your book appeals to everybody. It's not niche genre literature. It has a universality. And I don't know how you pulled that off, that sleight of hand, but I commend you for it. It has an immediacy of appeal to everyone, anyone who's interested in life, living life to the fullest. And when you come away having read it, you are more inclined, I think, to live a more intense and recollected and intentional life. And I congratulate you for that.
Beautiful. Scott.
And I thank you, not only for writing it, but for allowing us at Emmaus Road to publish this. And, to Regis's point, when you write for women, you sell books, because men don't buy, or if they do, they don't read. But I
Nor
would
do they
say,
buy from women.
But I would say this, men ought to read this, echoing what you just said, because it does not have that kind of one-sided feminine sense. It really does address the human condition. And I plan to get this for my daughter. I only have Hannah, and you know her well. And I think she's going to really, really appreciate this. But more to the point, I want to say, you ought to do this again, not next year, but you ought to think about where you are now and in 20 years, because we're in our 60s now. And when Kimberly is writing and reflecting, I realize that she has diamonds, whereas before she had pearls. And I would also say this, that when you write, you also touch the heart of people at every point along the journey. Not just women, but men. Not just women in their 20s, but men in their 40s or 60s as well. And this is a gift. This is not something that just you worked on and you acquired. I remember reading your papers back in the aughts when you were an MA student and thinking, she is gifted, but you took it from writing objective theological truth to writing subjective and profound theological truth. And I would also say this, that I've known your husband, Chris, a lot longer than I knew you, and I had him in graduate courses, and you are blessed. He is such an anchor. He is such a foundation. And together, the two of you have, not only produced a beautiful family, but a really fruitful apostolate. I mean, you really are fruitful apostles, and I'm grateful to God to be able to partner with you and with Chris. So God bless you.
Good. Thank you, Scott. And final thoughts.
Well, I think this book covers so many different topics, and so it's hard always to dive deep into it in 45 minutes. I wrote it over the course of like 7 months, actually, I think last year. And so whenever people ask me to sum it up, I'm like, why don't you read the book? But I've been thinking so much about living in a fatherless and motherless age, and that crisis and the emptiness we all feel, where we don't feel necessarily like we can trust our bishop. We don't feel like we can trust our president. A lot of people don't feel like they can trust the Pope. People don't feel like they can trust leaders of corporations. People come from broken families and don't trust their own mothers and fathers. And when you live in a fatherless age, people tend to run to the extremes. So they go extreme anti-whatever or extreme pro-whatever. They look for the strongest voices they can find. And sometimes the strongest voices they can find are their own emotions, and they let the emotions run away with them. And so when I talk about spiritual maturity, it's coming back to the heart of the church and listening to the voice of Christ and listening to the voices of the saints. And I'm just passing on advice from people smarter than me. I'm passing on the advice of St. Francis de Sales and Catherine of Siena and Edith Stein in there. I'm just repackaging it for people in our current culture. But that's when I talk about spiritual maturity, that's what it is. It's going back to the people who are mothers and who are fathers and letting them form us so that we can be the mothers and fathers that God wants us to be, not led by our emotions, not led by our passions, but with reason holding the reins. And I think that if we could do that, then you see the world change. It's not going to be elections. It's not going to be,
And having known you for a little while as well, I think you used the word firecracker for yourself one time. So that person that's able to, in the midst of the craziness, to stop and to be still and to be quiet, I think is the fruit and the inspiration of that, of your ability to do that. If you would like to learn more about today's topic, we have an article that was written by Emily. It's a handout. I believe it's one of the letters.
It's the letter on the church. Yeah.
Beautiful. One of the letters from Letters to Myself from the End of the World, written by Emily. It's yours free if you would simply go online to faithandreason.com or by calling the number you'll see at the bottom of the screen. As I read this, one of the things that my guess is probably everybody, if I were to write a book like this, what would I say? And that was really where I found myself, is what would I want to say to myself, and what are the things that I've learned? And then the other part, and actually saying the endorsement, is I look forward to, as you alluded, 20 years from now, what are you going to say to yourself? But then also, what would I want to say to myself 20 years from now? So just the whole idea I thought was very inspirational. But what I was struck with was a theme of mine that I love, and that is metanoia, is that the spiritual life is a process and it's a journey. And at a photo of you at 20 years old, when you were struggling and wrestling and just beginning to discover who Jesus is, but have stepped away from the church, is not the person that you are when you were 25, then when you were 30, that you were 35, and we'll just stop there. But this process of journey, and it just speaks to the Lord's patience, His kindness, His goodness, that He's provided you everything you need with the saints and with the sacraments and with the catechism and the scriptures and everything you need to become the person that the Lord wants you to be. And I think that that's the beauty of this book, is that the Lord has done that for each of us. He's provided that for you. He's provided that for us. And this journey that you allowed us to have a glimpse in, you just led us to see that. And it was beautiful. It was humble. It was vulnerable, so I want to thank you for being able to, for producing this book and then letting us take a look at it.
Thank you.
We ask the Lord's blessing on us, and that this is all of our invitation, is that the Lord is patient and He is kind and He has called us to Himself and He has given us everything available. So we pray for everybody on the journey that they are now on, trusting that the Lord's providence and His care for them. So we close with a prayer. Heavenly Father, You have called each one of us by name. You know us, You see us, You are patient with us, You are kind, and You provide us everything necessary to be the man of God that You've called us to be, the woman of God that You've called us to be, the mother, the father, the child, the son, the daughter, the brother, the sister. I pray Your grace would continue to animate us, that we would be who You desire us to be. Jesus, I pray particularly for the member who is watching today, who is struggling most, that Your grace would be present to them, and that You would lift them out, You would inspire them, You would fill them with hope, that they would journey with You. Ask Almighty God to pour His blessings on you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you so much, Emily. God bless you.
Download a free handout on today's topic at faithandreason.com, where you can also watch past episodes of Franciscan University Presents. Or request the handout by emailing us at presents@franciscan.edu. Or reach us by phone for today's handout by calling 800-783-6447. That's 800-783-6447.